There's a lot of designing, testing, and trial runs behind every new innovation or new performance record. How do I know? My name's Carroll Shelby, and performance is my business. I guess fast cars have always been an important part of my life. I started driving them on dirt tracks down in Texas. And after a while, I worked my way up to sport car driving.
Tell us your name and where you're born.
Carroll Shelby, Leesburg, Texas, January 11th, 1923.
Now, when did you learn how to fly?
I learned how to fly. I used to sweep out hangars and hang around the airports and the racetracks around Dallas, Texas in the 30s. I didn't learn to fly, however, until I joined the Air Force in April of 1941. And I always wanted to fly, but you had to have 2 years of college to go through the Army Air Force training school. And I only had a high school education. However, shortly after I joined, they came up with a program called Aviation Students, which were for mechanics in the Air Force. And we went through the same training that the cadets did. And I graduated from flight training in September of 1942, and then flew in a training command for until August of 45, when the war was over, and I retired from the Air Force.
Both my parents were in the Air Force.
Were they?
Yes. Now, had you seen planes a lot when you were a kid? Did you have heroes that were aviators?
Oh yes. In 1930, my family moved from a little town in East Texas, Leesburg, Texas, to Dallas, and we had been there about 2 weeks, and my dad took me out to Love Field there in Dallas. That was before it had any paved runways or anything. And they were taking people for a ride in Ford Tri-Motors for $1. And I told him I wanted to do that. And he said, okay. And he took me out, and we paid the $1, and I went riding in a Ford Tri-Motor. In 1930, I'd have been 7 years old then. And I always had a love for airplanes. I could tell you what airplanes the Army had, and the different airplanes that when I was 10 years old, I knew the difference between most airplanes.
Did you have heroes that were aviators?
Well, I had heroes. My hero is Benny Howard. Benny Howard won the Bendix, won several. He made racing airplanes in the 30s. Ike and Mike and so forth, and I knew Roscoe Turner and the other Jimmy Doolittle and all of those people, but my hero was Benny, because in 1937 he built an airplane called the let's see, what was the name? I'll think of it. Anyway, he won the race against Roscoe Turner, Jimmy Doolittle in their racing airplanes, and his airplane had a cabin. He and his wife flew it and outran them all across the United States in 1937, and they were leading it in 1938. And I'm told that a propeller blade came off over New Mexico at 12,500 feet. Benny got the airplane down. He lost a leg, and his wife, Mike, was in the hospital for about 6 months. However, I knew when I got to building cars in the 60s, I had a friend named Joe Schertzinger who had been on the board of directors at General Dynamics with Benny Howard. And Benny had a operation on Washington Boulevard in Venice, and he built hop-up kits for DC-3s. And I had a DC-3, and he came and I went in to see about one of the hop-up kits that he built, and told him what I did, and I was only about 2 or 3 blocks away where I was building the first Cobras. So he started hanging around. We have lunch once or twice a week for about. Minnie died in 1968, so that our relationship went on about 5 years, and he was my hero when I was a boy, and he's still my hero today. I have a couple of his airplanes. He built an airplane called DGA 15 that stood for Damn Good Airplanes, and I built a car called GLH when I was at Dodge called Go Like Hell, and I kind of thought of Benny when I named that car because he called Damn Good Airplane. Everybody used to ask, what does DGA stand for? He said, Damn Good Airplane. Benny went to the 8th grade, and he was a world subsonic aerodynamicist, undisputably the aerodynamicist of the world before we got into computers and all the sophisticated aerodynamics.
You really got to meet some interesting characters in those days, didn't you?
Yeah. During my racing, during my race driving career, I met most of the people that were prominent in aviation, and I maintain relationships with them, most of them that haven't croaked to this day.
In those days you had barnstormers and things like that, they would go...
Oh yeah, in the old World War I Jennies. And I used to go to the county fairs, and the people would take the old World War I pilots and buy those things, I think, for about $100 a piece. And they were all over the country. And I used to keep up. One of the amazing stories to me is the first airmail pilots that used to go across the country in the wintertime, and at night the Indians would build fires on top of mountains for their navigation. So I've seen aviation from 1928 when I first started watching airplanes up until today, and I was lucky enough to live through the golden age of aviation when so many, from 1930 till 1960, you made more strides in aviation than they made before or after.
About 66 years from Orville Wright to the man on the moon, huh?
Yeah, that's right. But look what they did before, from 1903 to 1930. And then from 1930, the jet age, to 1960. So, and the airplanes, not a hell of a lot of difference between 1960 and 2010.
Now, race car drivers and jet test pilots, do you think they have sort of a camaraderie, or they respect each other?
Yeah, they're both kind of nutty.
Now, when you were in war, did you see any action?
No, none at all. No, I love, though, to sit around and listen to the stories when we're up at Baron Hilton's ranch, and when you got Wally Schirra, the astronauts, and Gene Cernan, and Chuck Yeager, and Bob Hoover, and Clay Lacy, and John Myers sitting there telling their stories. That to me is the epitome of being able to sit around and listen to the guys that were part of the whole picture of aviation. And I enjoyed those hours, and still, although we've lost a lot of them, I still love to sit around and listen to the ones that are still alive.
Do you remember the first time you met John Myers?
I met him at Baron Hilton's ranch, I believe, and I got to talking to him, and he says, "Come on down." He had property around Long Beach Airport, and he says, "Come on down and have lunch." So my office was about 15 minutes from there, so I went down and had lunch with him, and I remember he says he ordered his Crystal Yum Yum, and he had a couple of those, and I remember I had a drink with him. I don't usually drink at lunchtime. I get sleepy. So I said, well, I'm going back to my office and take a nap. I said, what are you going to do? He says, I got to go to Argentina and go duck hunting. And I'm told that he and his wife got in their jet and took off that afternoon, went to Mexico City and went on down and went duck hunting. That's the kind of guy he was. I guess he was about 83, 85 then. And he flew his own jet right up till after he was 90 years old.